Hello, this is Cadet Sergeant Hartland, and I'm just going to spend maybe 15 minutes or so talking about the importance and what you should and should not do when going through the interview process. So I'm going to talk about these in roughly 7 stages. The first about resume and why it's important to have one. Well, you need one, but the importance to have a good resume. Also, some strategies that I personally incorporated, what I learned, and changes that I could have made, and changes I probably will be making in the future with my resume, as well as the importance of using spell check. The third part is I will be talking about the importance of keeping a resume updated. For part 4, I will be talking about my experience with the interview and what I've done and what I did. And so for part 5 and 6, they're going to be about what you should do to prepare for tough questions. These are, of course, your typical tell me about yourself question and the why should I hire you question. And why the latter is probably the most important that you will be asked during an interview. And then finally, I'm going to talk about why you should write a handwritten thank you letter to the interviewer. So, talking about that first topic, talking about the importance of having a good, strong resume, some tips that I did with writing one. So, with the resume, what you want to be thinking mostly about is just keeping it updated, which I will be talking about in part 3. But when you want to write a good resume, you want to start by having a clear-cut objective, having it be one page, and making sure that everything that you have on is clear. It's very clearly organized, and whatever, you want to talk about past job experiences, just look at this portion on the page. It's not super complicated. It shouldn't be a complicated ordeal. It shouldn't be a complicated piece of paper. Some strategies that I incorporated when I was writing my resume, I made sure to clearly define my experiences with previous jobs, one of which, or actually, so 2 of which, I have actually gone to, and one of which I had to sort of just base off of imagining how it would actually be like in that situation. And so, especially for this mock interview, you will definitely have to sort of finagle your way around with the previous job experiences, because you're probably going to hold a job during college. If you're not going to hold a job during college, I would not want to see your bank account. So get a job during college, and that's sort of something that you kind of have to just make up as you go along. But when you actually apply for a job, that should be very fleshed out, and you wouldn't have to fake anything. So what I learned when I was making this resume is that, keeping it organized and consistent is one of the most important parts. I had a few inconsistencies in mine. Those have been fixed. Like one was I had one section in all caps, and then I had one where just the first letter that was capitalized and the rest was just lowercase. So making sure it's basic things like that. It's little things will take you a long way with the resume process. And then of course the importance of taking a spell check. Having misspelled words and not proper grammar is going to sort of devalue your position as being a good candidate for whichever job you're applying for. And so making sure that you have perfect spelling and perfect grammar, those, again, little things that will take you a long way, especially in the first stage, which is resume. If your resume isn't good enough, they might not even call you for the interview. So even if you're the best interviewer in the world, if you don't have a good resume, it doesn't even matter. Speaking of which, or no, I'm not there yet, but now the importance of keeping your resume updated. So you obviously need to have an updated resume. That's kind of obvious. But the importance of keeping it updated with time is to make sure that you are well rested for when you hand in your resume and when you do your interview. So, say you change jobs between one point of time and the other. Once that job change happened, you should update your resume to reflect that. And, maybe have a good answer as to the question of, oh, well, why did you leave this job? Or why did you leave that job? Or something like that. Those are always good questions to make sure that you have lined up, especially if that's on your resume. If you have, say, a bad job experience, sometimes it's just best not to, or definitely don't put that person in as one of your references. And it might be better to leave it off of the resume altogether, but I wouldn't recommend that if you don't have to. If there's just like a gap, then they're going to ask, oh, well, what happened during that gap? So you should be prepared either way. So the importance of keeping it updated as well. So say you don't keep it updated and it's the night before you need to send it in. you're probably going to be spending multiple hours cramming in to make sure you have everything updated. And since it's not happening then and there, or you're not putting it down then and there, that's going to lead it to there to be some minor errors. And while minor errors aren't necessarily the end of the world, that does also sort of discredit you and discredit your position as being sort of a good resume writer and therefore a good interviewer, and therefore you're less likely the best candidate for the job. So those are some good things that you need to look out for with your resume. So you've taken everything that I've said into account and you've written the best resume possible. Great. So you've now made it to the interview process, which is, the make or break of getting that job, usually. So my experience with the mock interview, I thought it was a pretty good one. But before I get into my actual experience, let's talk about some things that you need to do beforehand in between sending your resume in and going to the interview. One thing that I did, and one thing that I recommend everyone else do, is, wear a bit above business casual attire. What I mean by that is what I wore khakis, I wore a button-up shirt with a blazer, and I had, my nicer shoes. And so I did not wear a tie, although a tie is highly recommended. The only reason I did not wear a tie is because I didn't have a tie that went with the blazer and didn't clash with it. So yeah, wear a tie. That's probably my biggest mistake in terms of just not doing anything in terms of actual preparation, making yourself look nice and dapper for your interview. And you should also make sure that you have your references available. If they're not already mentioned in the resume, you should always, say, oh, hey, I should have, or I have references available if should you wish. But definitely make sure that that's written on your resume. Now, my personal experience with the interview, I thought I had a good experience. I was interviewed by Mr. Stephen Womack, which you might know at Franklin High. I think I had a pretty good experience. I was asked some pretty tough questions. And aside from the ones that I will be talking about later on, and I think sort of having confidence as you're walking in is definitely good. Something that my friend was having trouble with, and I sort of helped out with her, was that, listening to a song, maybe if you're nervous or something like that, listening to a song that helps you calm down, that helps me a lot, especially if I'm nervous, but I'm also kind of a musical person. But yeah, making sure that you have ways to sort of calm you down beforehand, just right then and there, right before you walk in the door, that's always something that's very good, especially if you know that, yeah, you can tend to get nervous by these sorts of interviews and experiences. So I think now we should probably get into the big stuff. So for tough questions, the first one, of course, is the typical, tell me about yourself. Now, how I answered this question, almost word for word, is, so I've just graduated from Belmont University with my bachelor's in business, and I am looking for my first full-time job. I have, left my current occupation because that's a job, not necessarily a career, and this job I want to turn into my career. I have been putting myself in leadership positions in my whole life, and that's why I think that coming into this company as an entry-level business manager is going to be both good for you and for me, because this is going to be my first career. It's not exactly like that, so maybe I shouldn't have said word for word, but that's sort of the gist. You want to establish yourself as a capable person. You want to establish, say you've had a good history. I did by saying, I was band president, which I don't know if that's going to happen yet, but I assumed, hey, I was elected band president. Things like those sorts of things are going to be good for you, and they're going to be good for your interviewer, because that sort of gives them good platforms to ask questions that you are much more prepared for, because you are much more, experienced with those sorts of things. For example, he was talking about my experience as being band president and some challenges that I faced. One of which was that I imagined a situation where, there were a couple of these people who were being unruly. The band president doesn't really do much at Franklin High. And so, I just sort of you kind of have to imagine, especially with this mock interview, being in those situations that you describe yourself in, but also sort of building it off of actual experiences. That's always a good start. When I was mentioning my previous job, he also asked about a time that I had an unruly customer. And I've been thankful that I haven't really had many Karens walk into the jobs that I've worked at before. Or if they have, I haven't dealt with them. But you should always make sure, or from my experience, when he asked that question, I was just like, okay, well, I haven't really had many unruly customers before, but if I did, here's what I would have done. I would have, made sure to keep calm. I would have made sure to, try to solve their problem, however their imagined problem, however it was, and, try to make sure that they're still satisfied and that they don't cause a ruckus for other customers. Your typical answer to a question like that. I'm not super original, but sort of having those sorts of things in your mind walking in, both into the mock interview and into the real one, are going to make you stand out and make you seem like a better candidate for the job that you're applying for. And so the second thing with preparation for why should I hire you, and why that is probably the most important question. So they will probably ask you this question towards the end of the interview. So if you're one of those people who get nervous, kind of consider that as, oh, it's almost over, woohoo. Or not, I've saw a mock interview where that was one of the first questions, or actually the third question that they asked, and they asked like 10 or so. The why should I hire you question you should always take as an opportunity to sort of say, okay, you should hire me because, I don't know, say for my example, because I will be an adaptable, effective, and, fresh manager to the company that you're working this is and that I'll be applying for, and I will be able to sort of help this company grow through my experience and my education and my expertise in the field. Again, it's subjective, so whichever works best for you, you should do. But sort of making your final case and making sure that you are giving yourself the best, no, it's kind of weird because it's kind of complicated because you have to make yourself seem best without at the same time making yourself seem like a narcissist and that, oh, I'm so perfect and so everything like that, because they're like, okay, this dude's just some sort of narcissist trying to get this job because he thinks he's so good. Okay, I'm going to ignore him, moving on. So making sure that it's not that, and it's kind of like you got to find the happy medium. I think always having humility is also going to help you stand out, and especially acknowledging, okay, yeah, here's this time where I messed up, here's how I fixed it, and here's how I grew from the experience. Having one of those in mind, because they're probably going to ask something like that, and if they don't ask that during this question, they might, or if they haven't asked it before, mentioning it during this question is probably going to be a good thing for you. Because, say, oh, why should I hire you? Well, whenever I make a mistake, I learn from it. For example, whatever you're gonna use as your experience, right? So making sure that you have tons of, making sure to take this question as your example to sort of say, this is the Hail Mary if all else fails to get into your interview. And so last but not least, the importance of sending a handwritten thank you letter. I'm sure Major Massey or Sergeant Major Moore will already stress this to you, but if they haven't, I will. So sending a handwritten, not to type, a handwritten, because it makes it seem more personal and it shows you how bad your penmanship is, I know, is going to be it's going to make you stand out, because I think sending thank you letters as a whole has been on the decline, like culturally as a whatever, for at least our generation. I don't know about you guys and whenever this video is going to be shown, but sending thank you letters is definitely starting to fall out of favor. And so when you send that handwritten thank you letter, sort of mention some things that you should do is you should mention some experience of the interview, some unique happening that you think only happened with your interview and that selection process. And go ahead and bring it up, so that way you're sort of reminding the interviewer, oh yeah, it's that person who had this kind of crazy story about, I don't know, how he caught some shark when he went with his dad and how it taught him, I don't know, patience or something like that. Again, it's kind of keeping that into perspective and sending that and to sort of make them remember you in a way is always a good start. Also, again, make sure that you ask for the job. If you didn't ask for the job during the interview, ask for the job during the handwritten thank you letter. That is going to help you tremendously. And I mean, I guess that's kind of it. Make sure you sign it at the bottom, of course. Don't want to just write your name. And actually address it like a letter. And I would send it roughly make sure that they get it within a week to 2 weeks of, that sort of time frame, and getting that within that sort of time frame for the interview. Um, but with all that said, that's kind of all I've got. So if you have any questions, ask Major Massey, and I wish you all a good one.